Alyx Terrell is a marine biologist and modern-day explorer searching the ocean depths for the answer to climate change. Alyx comes from humble beginnings in Quincy, Illinois, 550 miles from the nearest ocean. Her scientific brain started working long before most when she noticed that worms she dug up would dry out and die in the morning sun. At only 5 years old, she began testing methods to keep these worms alive in her jars, such as keeping them out of direct sunlight. So how did she find her way to the ocean? This journey began when she noticed how much she enjoyed swimming and loved animals. Thus, upon leaving for college, she went off for a degree in marine biology. Alyx started her undergrad at Stetson University in Florida, but fell in love and transferred to UNCW in Wilmington, North Carolina. Here she met a professor working on the widely known documentary Blackfish and became his personal assistant, combing through documents for what would later be considered a society-changing documentary. Following her undergraduate, she moved to the land down under and began her master's at James Cook University in Queensland, Australia. Alyx's application stood out from the other students because while working at UNCW, her team had found an unidentified anemone. Her research into this animal would lead to identification of it by another team, and this finding was published when she applied to JCU. However, Alyx exists beyond her academic achievements. She's also a yoga teacher. When she moved to Bali after her time at JCU, she converted to Hinduism. She's vegan. She teaches dance classes. She's scuba certified. She's into rock climbing, painting, and is a talented stick and poke tattoo artist. Currently, she's also preparing to host a women-only retreat in Hawaii for returning to nature and empowering oneself. After JCU, Alyx worked at a small submersible company called OceanGate. She led an expedition that was supposed to last 12 hours, but due to an engineering oversight and a nasty storm, lasted 36. Thanks to her quick thinking, all passengers, although disgruntled, returned home alive and having seen the Titanic. The research question Alyx decided to tackle at JCU was this: is there something in juvenile coral that changed with climate change? Their paper states coral bleaching is a large problem for this ecosystem. Alyx's publication I have chosen to showcase is the promotion of stress-tolerant algae symbionts dominance in juveniles of 2 coral species under simulated future conditions of ocean warming and acidification. In this study, she and her team investigated how projected future climate conditions affect the establishment of symbiotic algae in juvenile corals. Let's briefly go over the experiments conducted. Colonies were collected from Jeffrey Bay at Magnetic Island, Great Barrier Reef. Post-fertilization, coral larvae were exposed to 3 climate conditions. These conditions simulated present-day and future ocean warming and acidification scenarios. Juvenile corals were monitored over time to assess the algae symbionts that were acquired, and to determine the symbiont community composition, DNA was extracted from the individual coral juveniles, and the internal transcriber spacer region of the ribosomal DNA was amplified and sequenced. Alyx had previously developed a method of genotyping coral and their symbionts with a methodology used on fruit flies. This method is still used by most marine biologists in her field to this day. This figure shows how the types of symbiont algae in the coral juveniles changed over time under different climate conditions. Panel A of the figure shows the average amount of different types of algae present in the coral at 3 time points: T0 before they were under experimental conditions, T1 after 10 days, and T2 after 4 weeks. This figure compares these changes under 3 conditions: ambient, predicted 2050 conditions, and predicted 2100 conditions. Panel B shows the percentage of coral juveniles that had the type of symbiotic algae at the same 3 time points, T0, T1, and T2, under different climate conditions. This figure helps us see how future ocean warming and acidification might affect which types of symbiotic algae corals form relationships with, potentially impacting their survival and resilience. So far, Alyx has uncovered that when young corals were exposed to warmer and more acidic ocean conditions, there was a shift in symbiont dominance. Stress-tolerant algae became more common in the corals, and this suggests future climate conditions could change which types of algae corals rely on for their survival. Alyx et al. Also found that different coral species responded differently, meaning some may be better at adapting than others. They conclude their research by calling for more research to understand whether these shifts in symbiont dominance will actually help the corals survive long term, which is important for our conservation efforts. Before we wrap things up, part of this assignment was to talk about why we chose our scientists for this project, and why we admire them. I chose Alyx because every time I speak to her, she drops more lore about a past life that seems impossible to be wrapped up into one human. This project has been greatly abridged to fit the assigned time, and that's a shame because our interview lasted 2 hours. I admire her brilliance and the way she uses it to save the world. Her research will continue when she secures funding for her PhD, and when she does, her studies of how to save our coral reefs will continue. I'm Jessie Seymour, and this was a project.